In 1932, MGM released the circus-themed movie Freaks. Produced and directed by Todd Browning, most well known today as the director of the Bela Lugosi Dracula film, the movie tells the story of a romance between Hans, a midget sideshow performer, and Cleopatra, a trapeze artist, who's just pretending to love him so she can kill him and inherit his vast fortune. All set against the background of an early 20th century freak show, and featuring a number of real-life sideshow performers from around that time. And if you're already thinking, well, this idea wouldn't fly today, well, it almost didn't happen then either. The movie was rife with production problems, mostly from difficulties the normal actors and the sideshow performers had with sharing the same stage space, resulting in completely separate rest and eating areas having to be sectioned off to avoid possible conflicts between the groups. If Todd Browning wasn't a huge supporter of the project, having been in a traveling carnival before his film career, and he didn't have a lot of clout with the Hollywood system thanks to his reputation of successful ventures, the movie likely never would have seen the light of day. Even then, initial test screenings of the movie proved disastrous, with people actually running out of the theater screaming, and some even threatening to sue the studio for long-term ill effects from watching the film. The movie was then butchered in post, with the initially 90-minute movie being cut down to barely over an hour, and most of the third act trimmed out and lost forever. And even after the edits, or maybe because of them, the movie bombed hard with critics and audiences, barely making back its production budget, with some countries outright banning it, and ruining Todd Browning's career, leading to his ostracization from Hollywood a few years later. The film languished in obscurity for decades, before being rediscovered as a cult film in the 60s, and it has since been given a more favorable critical reappraisal, with a lot of critics today considering it one of Todd Browning's best movies, as well as one of the greatest films ever made. And yeah, I think I'm in that crowd as well. I first saw this when I was a teenager, and it's stuck with me ever since. Though I don't really agree with the genre the movie's usually assigned. A lot of distributors classify this as a horror or exploitation film, and I don't think that's accurate. It's more of a modern fairy tale, a fantasy story, with clear black and white standards for our heroes and villains, an idealized yet everyday setting for the characters to live in, and the classic ending moral not to be deceived by appearances, and that true beauty is found on the inside. Oh, and don't mess with circus performers or they'll wreck your shit up. But even ignoring its cliched yet still engaging plot, it's a wonder just to watch these performances. These are real sideshow performers, and the movie treats them like real people. More often than not, performers with disabilities are portrayed as exploited individuals, tortured by their caretakers and ridiculed by society, when they just want to be treated like everyone else. Or they're the straight-up monsters that the world sees them as. Here, they're just regular people going about their day-to-day lives. Okay, they have to do certain things differently depending on what their disabilities allow them to do, but in general, they're no different than the everyday person. They have lives, they have jobs, they have relationships, they have biological families, and a close-knit adoptive circus family. Their circus stints are just their talents, what they're good at, and what they can play up to attract audiences. That's a very admirable statement from a movie, especially one made during a time when segregation and eugenics were still accepted facts. And even today, when we're arguably so wrapped up in wanting to stand up for others, we tend to forget the others in question are people as well. But whatever you take away from this movie, it's still a visual spectacle, with a fun story and characters, yet still very mature themes and visuals. I highly recommend it for horror and fantasy fans, and nostalgia film buffs alike. And maybe one day, an uncut version will be unearthed from inside a long-forgotten studio executive's briefcase. And yes, this is the source of that meme you've probably seen around. Anyway, in 2007, the Asylum gave us their own take on the story with their remake, Freakshow. Which is shockingly not the first time the movie has been remade, nor the first movie to call itself Freakshow. I think I've already gone on long enough about the original movie, and I don't have any exciting anecdotes to share at this time, so let's buy some peanuts and Cracker Jack and see what spectacle this shoestring budget sideshow has in store for us. Around what I'm assuming is the early 20th century, a shady group of young men and women are hired on as workers for a somewhat famous traveling circus. Their initial plan is to abscond at the week's ticket sales. However, the woman of the group, Lucy, presents an alternative plan. She's overheard that Lon, the circus owner, is phenomenally rich with vast tracts of land to his name. Therefore, she'll seduce him into marrying her, then kill him off and inherit his fortune. Her plan seems to go swimmingly, until her actions start to raise suspicion among the more permanent members of the circus troupe, including the eccentric sideshow performers. As Lon and Lucy's wedding day fast approaches, the rest of the circus must discover if Lucy's truly one of them, or if she'll mean the end of their happy little family. Will they stop Lucy before she ruins their lives and careers? Are only half the sideshow performers they hired for the movie actually sideshow performers? Alright, I think it's been too long since I began one of these reviews on a positive note, so let's try to be constructive for as long as we can. This movie is shot magnificently. Seriously, this is some of the best camera work I've ever seen from an Asylum film. Look at the sweeping motions, the wide angles, the soft focus changes, the expert use of tracking shots. The visuals say more than I could ever put into words. We've been getting a good string of movies where it's obvious the people behind the camera knew what they were doing. For this one, cinematic duties were once again handled by Mark Atkins, the director of Evil Eyes and Halloween Night, and the cinematographer behind Dead Men Walking, The Possession of Gail Bowers, When a Killer Calls, and Snakes on a Train, among a couple dozen other movies we've yet to get to. He and Steve Parker are easily the best directors of photography of the early Asylum's catalog. Even if the rest of the movie is unwatchable, they put their all into at least making it viewable. They don't always succeed, but it's nice to know that, even if the movie sucks the big smelly one, there's still someone behind the scenes making sure we can watch it without the camera movement making us want to puke our guts out. That's the on-screen action's job. Even when filming switches to a handheld camera, I don't have much of a problem with it. It's still held mostly still, keeping everyone in frame, and it knows who to focus on and when, demonstrating some great communication between the director and the cinematographer. Unlike something like Shapeshifter, where the operator was clearly confused where everyone was, trying and usually failing to keep up with what they're doing. Sometimes the camera seems to transcend just being a lens to view the action through, becoming a character in itself, almost like an Edgar Wright movie. When it's following around Lon and Lucy, I can actually picture a shorter person holding a camera, trying to keep up with them and document what's going on. Or even a disembodied presence that mysteriously follows our leads around this haunting carnival setting. It's a lot like the beginning to Evil Eyes, and what I wish the rest of that movie was. When there's a lot of people on screen at once, it never feels claustrophobic. The camera just naturally feels like part of the crowd, knowing where to sit or stand to get the best viewing perspective. And when it's placed 6 inches from an actor's face or focused on someone's mouth, which I swear is a Mark Atkins trademark, it matches the weird and otherworldly atmosphere of the carnival setting. Yeah, it's uncomfortable, but for this movie, that's the point. If there was no actual camera brought to the set, and the whole movie was filmed by a brilliantly talented sideshow performer who somehow naturally had a film camera for a head, I would surprisingly not be surprised. And the footage they shot is greatly complemented by the post-production filters. Anyone who's watched my show for long enough knows how much I hate lazy color saturation. Just give everything a shade of blue, green, or purple, or just raise or lower the contrast of the raw footage and call it a day. It looks ugly, and not in the way they mean it. It's lazy, boring, and makes the movie even harder to watch. I think I'm actually starting to go colorblind from having to watch so many movies where they only emphasize one color. The cones of my eyes just start to shut down from all the monotone monochrome. I never had that problem with this movie. Yes, there are a lot of filters, but each one is done professionally, complementing the tone of the scene it's used for. A lot of the day shots have a yellowish-orange glow to them, emphasizing the dry, rural Midwestern Dust Bowl-like setting the carnival likely takes place in. It's empty, desolate, and with the sun unforgivingly beating down on the people below. But it's also haunting, fantastical, and almost daring you to explore the fairgrounds, even if it means your death, by heatstroke or cannibal clown. A lot of other day shots also use some variant of this coloring, sometimes adding a bit of black and white to represent the poverty-stricken drifters that have short-term employment at the circus, sometimes shading everything in a dim orange to picture a circus tent interior in the evening light, and sometimes even using this odd filter that makes the footage look solarized. Like the live-action footage from Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, but not as intense. It looks like a vintage photograph. A sepia-toned picture from the early 20th century given life like one of those Harry Potter living photos. This may be the best use of lighting and coloring to set a mood I've seen in any Asylum movie. And a much better portrayal of vintage film than Death Valley tried to use. or even some more mainstream movies I could name. The other filters they use work well as well. We have some blues for night shots, some reds for when things are about to get serious, and sometimes they just leave the lighting natural, which, after sitting through Dragon, looks a million times better than any lazy color saturation, no matter what mood they're trying to set. And while quite a few scenes are shot at night, the lighting is so perfect I never had a problem seeing what they were showing. Every character is visible, every action is noticeable, and I can tell what they're thinking while they're doing it. This movie should be shown to every future director, cinematographer, or any behind-the-scenes crew in general who want to break into film as an example of how scenes like this should be shot, and how a minuscule budget isn't an excuse to let your film look like garbage. Though, if that's the statement to be made, they shouldn't be shown the whole movie, but we'll get back to that. But the behind-the-scenes crew aren't the only people working hard to make the project work, as a lot of the actors clearly put their all into their roles. Christopher Adamson plays Lon, the Boston Carnival owner, and this is one of the best written characters I've seen in an asylum movie. Oh, he's not a good person. On the contrary, he's one of the biggest creeps I've seen in one of these movies. But that's what makes him so fascinating. While it's established that he's phenomenally rich, owning large sections of land in his home country, it's clear he doesn't care for riches and titles. The circus is his home, and the performers within are his family. In his introductory scene, he addresses the troupe, permanent and temporary workers alike, reminding everyone that they have a show in a few days, and that certain expectations must be met. And if his expectations aren't met, and they don't make enough money to keep going, well, there are going to be consequences. It's a genuinely intimidating speech, and at first it appears he's just the cruel, greedy ringmaster these characters are usually written as. But then one of the performers trips, some of the new hires start laughing, and Lon is far from amused, firing them on the spot. One of them dares to insult the sideshow performers, and Lon sicks the strongman on him, nearly strangling him before tossing him out. I love this scene! It establishes Lon as the father figure of the troupe, expressing his love for their loyalty and service, but also maintaining a tough image, making it clear he's not someone to make angry. It's a perfectly balanced, strict yet caring personality, and the actor pulls it off beautifully. But while Lon is dedicated to his business and his adopted family, he's also a bit of a lech. It's suggested that he'll sleep with any young woman who will have him at every stop the circus makes. But due to the large boils covering his body, the selections are middling at best. So when Lucy comes along to tickle his fancy, among other things, he wastes no time sowing his wild oats and making her his main arm candy. And it's this obsession that leads him down a path of destruction, as she tears away his inhibitions, his common sense, and any responsibility he has for the circus, ultimately leading to him all but abandoning his troupe and dedicating himself to Lucy solely on the basis that she's a good lay. And this results in the troupe rebelling and him losing the respect and authority he once held in the circus. It's this duality and progression, or rather regression, that makes Lon stand out from the one or two note characters that most asylum movies are almost completely comprised of. So many of these tokens from so many of these movies could be switched out with nothing lost, but there's only one Lon, and only this actor could play this character. Well, him or Michael Rosen. But I digress. And then we have the return of Rebecca Cochan, playing a villain this time as Lucy, the seductress who wants to marry Lon, then off him and inherit his vast fortune, and she'll put up with anything to achieve that goal. And while this is new territory for this actress, at least I assume it is, I haven't seen the Eating Out series, Rebecca is a natural in this role. It's obviously not as deep or complex as Lon's character, but she pulls off the seductive, conniving bitch performance with flying colors. It's she who first comes up with the plan, then carefully manipulates Lon to weaken his resolve and destroy his reason with some subtle, and not so subtle, tactics. She'll play the love slave who's only there to please Lon, then laugh behind his back with her friends. But even she has her limits, and when she's tired and in a place or position she can't handle, she'll snap and lash out at those around her, only for her to beg to be taken back, which her new puppet will gladly do. It's a perfectly serviceable villain role, escalated by just how well Rebecca wears both the alluring yet needy temptress mask she puts on for Lon, and the wily free-spirited con artist she lets shine when he's not around. It's a disgusting yet beautiful performance that Rebecca pulls off without fail. Except when the writing itself fails, but we'll get back to that. The other performance that really stood out to me is Robert Pike Daniel. Now, we've seen this guy before, and he usually plays important, stodgy, humorless bureaucrats and clergy in not just asylum movies, but most of his filmography in general. Most of it. Here, he plays the greedy, corrupt, weaselly, foul-mouthed, perverted, misogynistic, alcoholic, New York accented security chief. And he's eating up every second of it. This is a complete reversal of his previous roles, and yet he pulls it off with a shit-eating grin. He only has 2 or 3 scenes, none of them lasting more than a few minutes, but he chews up so much scenery during his time on screen, I'm surprised they still have a tent to film in. He is so much fun to watch, and a personality I wouldn't mind seeing this actor reprise in something else. And him acting like he's above it all, only to get beaten and put in his place, is the icing on the cake. In an experimental move for the studio, the soundtrack of the movie is comprised of old musical recordings. And I mean old. Every single song is from the early 20th century, with none more recent than 1923, and some as old as 1903. Almost 20 of these recordings comprise the movie's soundtrack, with literally no other music utilized. For the entire runtime, you're listening to public domain gramophone recordings almost as old as the movie industry itself. It's an interesting move, but it does help to establish tone and time period. I fully believe Lon or one of the other circus performers could have these playing in their trailer after a long day of practice and setup. And it adds to the haunting nature of the circus, masking the malicious ulterior motives some of the workers may have towards the others. It mostly works. But if we wanted some recordings that really represented the time period, then why not include such classic titles as Hallelujah, I'm a Bum, The Wreck of the Titanic, Oogie Oogie Wah Wah, The Man That Waters the Workers' Beer, I Sent My Wife to the Thousand Isles, The Spaniard That Blighted My Life, and my personal favorite, She's Getting More Like the White Folks. Yes, these are all real songs. Yes, they're all in the public domain. So if you ever feel the need to use the Bailiff's Daughter of Islington in something, well, now you can. And this is cheating slightly, but I also have to give praise to the set work. I say cheating because the sets were not built for the movie. It's actually an abandoned set formerly used for the HBO series Carnival, which had abruptly ended in 2005, and I'm guessing they rented the set to use before it was fully demolished. Still, what a find! It looks like a traveling carnival from the early to mid 20th century, with tents, sideshow games, vintage vehicles, and rides that could be quickly assembled, then taken down for cross-country travel. I don't know if they had mobile home trailers like Lon lives in around the time period this allegedly takes place in, but this is the same studio that taught us that Anne Bonny is alive and young in late 18th century America, so burritos have beans. There's your reasoning. Alright, we got some positives down. We can see how hard everyone worked on this movie, how good everything looks, and how the crew behind the scenes and the actors on screen clearly had a lot of fun with the project and were so eager for it to succeed. Great! This is one of the worst Asylum movies I've watched so far, and a good contender for one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But wait, you exclaim as you scroll the video back to double check what I just said. Didn't you just spend the last 20 minutes praising this movie? How can a movie have everything you just said it had and yet turn out to be one of the worst movies the Asylum has ever made? Well, yes, most of the technical work is damn impressive, and some of the actors go the Christopher Lee route and give a phenomenal performance despite what they're given to work with. But it's in what truly makes a movie where the important elements don't just fall flat, they leap off a 200-foot tall diving board straight into solid ground. And as messy as that sounds, it gets worse. Much, much worse. While the genre of the original film is still being argued to this day, there's no debate what kind of movie Freakshow wants to be. A porn. Yeah, think about it. It's about a young woman who has to seduce an older man into giving up his circus. And seduce him she does, since nearly every scene she shares with him involves them banging, or at the very least flashing her gagas at him. And when they're not screwing, one of the drifters is screwing the sideshow cannibal lady. And when nobody's banging, they're talking about banging, and looking forward to the next time they bang. It's a porn! They just leave out the genitalia and penetration. Well, okay, people do get penetrated, but we'll get back to that. I cannot stress enough how horny this movie is. It's why I haven't played any of the dialogue. There are enough F-bombs to level a Sunday school. I don't know what happens more, them saying or them actually f***ing. This is the porniest movie we've seen yet from the Asylum. It makes Vampires vs. Zombies and Wildflower look innocent enough to stream on PureFlix. It's yet another Asylum production that's less focused on being a movie and more the writer-director-producer's fetish material. Which, considering how many of those we've already come across, I'm legitimately curious what the horniness level of the studio's actual sex flicks is set to. And if there's an actual porn parody of the original Freaks movie. I tried doing a quick search for one and, well... My eyes! Oh, and Lon gets a blowjob from behind a podium while trying to hide it from a coworker. Yeah, only Police Academy can make that funny. But if that's what you're into and it still sounds like something you'd want to watch, well, you're going to be waiting a long time for the sexy bits. And all for sequences that climax faster than An American Werewolf in London. I apologize for making you think things happen in this movie, because they don't. For the first 10 minutes, the movie gives the impression it's going to be a real movie. It sets up the characters and setting, starts off Lucy's plan, gives us that really good scene of Lon addressing the troupe and showing how much he expects out of, yet cares for everyone. And that's it. As soon as Lucy starts seducing Lon, the plot slams on the brakes and nothing important happens for over 40 minutes. And I'm using the term important very generously. I know my most common complaint is pointing out that there's no plot, to the point you're probably thinking I reuse the same template for each of these reviews, but somehow this movie feels emptier than most. With other movies I've criticized for having very loose to no narrative flow, the location changed every 20 to 30 minutes. I could skip to minute 40 and tell that we were at a different point than we were at minute 16. Here, it feels like we're in the same place for nearly the entire runtime. For at least 3/4 of the movie, we have a grand total of 2 different scenes. Someone's screwing, or someone's arguing. Sometimes both at once. In the span of 15 minutes, starting from Lucy beginning her plan, we have Lucy convincing Lon to sleep with her, then we have her friends arguing about if her plan will work, then we have one of them plowing on the performers, then we have Lon arguing with the rest of the troupe about how good a Lucy is, then we have Lucy going down on Lon. Repeat that sequence about 3 or 4 more times, and there's your movie. Yeah, those character arcs I was praising the movie for earlier, that was mostly me filling in the gaps, since the movie barely explains anything important about its characters, preferring to stretch out the same redundant conversations about sex and Lucy's plan over and over again, while inserting more profanity than a 12-year-old on a Call of Duty server. Never before have I more wanted to wash a movie's mouth out with soap. Oh, but they also include long, irrelevant transitions between each of these scenes to fool you into thinking there's progression, and they're just as effective as those strobe lights cheap haunted houses use to give the illusion of movement, when all they do is give you a headache. But fine, the original movie wasn't that plot-driven either, with a simplistic good versus evil bedtime story serving as its main structure. Instead, it relied on its cast of colorful and talented characters to push the action along, leading to some of the most memorable moments in cinema. Remember the bearded lady giving birth to a daughter? Or one of the conjoined twins announcing her engagement to the circus owner? Or the quadriplegic Prince Randian rolling and lighting a cigarette? I do. They're some of the most beautiful, humanity-filled scenes ever put into a movie. Featuring real performers not everyone, especially back then, would consider human. And it wouldn't be that hard to recreate something like that today. Find modern sideshow workers and document their daily lives and interactions. Or at the very least, show what goes on behind the scenes at a carnival getting ready for opening night in a new location. If they can recapture the feeling of working at a traveling circus, then this is a good opportunity to bring the casual yet uplifting feeling of the original movie to a modern audience. And with how much I've talked it up, you already guessed they don't do that. The reason I haven't brought up the sideshow performers until now? Because the movie itself forgets to include them. Unlike the original, where the performers took center stage and we got to see them live and interact in a familiar carnival environment, this movie pushes its sideshow cast off to, well, the side. We'll see them walking around sometimes, they're dancing in a couple transitions, 1 or 2 of them may get about half a minute of uninterrupted screen time, but for the most part, their presence is inconsequential. The only time the performers are given any importance is right at the end of the movie. And that's a whole other can of worms to open. And in case you actually did want to watch a movie called Freakshow for the freaks, there are few actual performers to be found. Sure, we have a couple notable names in the field, and the people they did get all do their best with what they're given, including these two can suspend themselves from hooks embedded in their skin, but a good chunk of the performers in this movie are just regular actors wearing prosthetics. Originally, I had a much longer and angrier rant about how they couldn't be bothered to find actual sideshow performers for a remake of a movie famous for using sideshow performers as its main cast. But with how this movie treats its characters, I'm glad they didn't waste the time and talent of other performers. And admittedly, I wouldn't have known that not everyone was an actual sideshow performer if I hadn't watched the behind the scenes on the DVD. That's either a huge credit to the film, or an awful generalization on my part. But that leads us to one of the stranger aspects of the movie. Apparently, the main plot was originally about a reporter named Hank traveling around the circus, interviewing the performers. And along the way, he'd find himself relating to their hardships with his own life tragedies, discovering that they're just people like him and forming a close bond with the performers, possibly including a relationship with the half-man, half-woman performer of the troupe. Now that sounds fascinating, and much closer to the tone and message of the original movie. But for one reason or another, it was never finished and was cut out of the final project, though at a late enough stage that it's still mentioned in the behind-the-scenes featurettes, and Hank's actor, Dane Rosselli, is still given top billing despite having less than a minute of screen time. Most of the footage is still used, but re-edited into contextless filler that removes Hank's background or relevance. So if you ever wonder what the story is behind that random guy the camera likes to focus on at random points during the movie, well, there it is. Thankfully, Hank's scenes are available unedited as a bonus feature on the DVD. So that's one thing this remake has over the original, I guess. Oh, but don't worry, this movie has a slew of other characters to Sideline, while also trying to convince us they're important. Including Sherry, the circus co-owner, I guess? She just sort of springs into existence around the 20-minute mark, and suddenly we're supposed to see her as the main victim in the Lon and Lucy affair. And even her relationship with Lon is unclear. They're clearly close, they've clearly been working together for quite some time, but I have no idea if they're romantically involved. They say they tell everyone else they're husband and wife. Which, why aren't they husband and wife? If they're already pretending to be married, why don't they just start out married in the first place? Why can't the story be that Lon is cheating on her with Lucy and they're trying to keep a secret? Or even that Lon has no problem with bigamy and wants Lucy as a second wife? Because otherwise, I have no idea what purpose Sherry is supposed to serve. She has 2 scenes with Lon about how upset she is that Lon has a thing for Lucy, she's shot down both times, and then later she gains the loyalty of the other performers and usurps full control of the circus from Lon. Besides that, she's just gone. Like she was written in last minute when they had already started filming, and they just slipped her scenes in post. Her name's not even said once in the entire movie, I don't think. She's just there for some last-minute love triangle, and so Lon can get some form of comeuppance. And so she can rock at Danny DeVito as the Penguin-style flipper hand. Which I didn't even notice until I watched the behind-the-scenes. Thank you, Mark Atkins, and your style of filming everyone almost exclusively from the neck up. And then there's Lucy's friends, a group of drifters who have been hired for some temporary work while the circus is in town. They're just there for Lucy to pitch her idea to, then debate every time they're on screen if Lucy's plan is working or not. One of the guys regularly bangs one of the performers, because sex, and one of them roughs Lucy up at one point and tells her to stick to the plan, even though it was her plan and he's the one who doesn't think it will work. Otherwise, they just mill around and pretend to work, which, thanks to the acting quality, I can't tell if they're intentionally only pretending or not. They're more redundant than the Zaytun scene from Alibaba and the Gold Raiders, where someone says Zaytun, then the bandits ask if someone said Zaytun, then someone says Zaytun, then the bandits ask if someone says Zaytun. Yeah, I decided to give the mother-daughter scene from the room a break this week. You could take Sherry, the drifters, and most of the sideshow performers out of the movie entirely and miss absolutely nothing. And the movie knows this, since it's more interested in showing an old man with boils plow into a beautiful blonde lady than actually telling a story. Anything related to the original source material is inconsequential, only put in because they had a circus set to use, they had to blatantly cash in on something more well-known, and a porn version of Dumbo would have been too weird. I'm sure that already exists. Okay, there are a couple scenes where you can tell they're trying to tie this movie in with the original. At around the 45-minute mark, we get an homage to the original movie's infamous wedding ceremony. And that gets screwed over in a different way. First of all, they leave out the Gooba Gaba One of Us chant, which is like making a Star Wars movie without someone mentioning they're uncomfortable about the situation. And secondly, and most glaringly, Lucy reacts in the exact same way as Cleopatra in the original, despite them being two completely different characters. Cleopatra was proud, vain, upper class, and shown multiple times to clearly have disdain for the sideshow performers. During the initiation ceremony, she was drunk and being mocked by her actual fiancé Hercules that she was going to become one of who she referred to as freaks. And with how much strain she already was under trying to pretend to love Hans, it's a no-brainer that someone of that stature and mindset would lose control in that situation. Here, Lucy is established as on the low rung of society, clearly poor and possibly homeless, willing to do anything for money. She clearly has no pride or standards, especially if she's willing to blow an old man with more pus-filled abscesses than a garbage pail kid. And besides one quick scene where she's having dinner with Lon, we never see her interact with any of the performers, so we're never given a glimpse as to how she sees them. So this whole blow-up comes straight out of nowhere. In fact, she's actually crueler than Cleopatra was, straight up calling them circus toys and God's mistakes. I know you don't have to be rich to be prejudiced, but really? This is the breaking point? She's fine with getting railed nightly by Bob's big boils, but she can't handle sharing a drink with a group of people she otherwise has nothing to do with? I'm sorry, but nothing we've been shown about her, her situation, or her lifestyle leads to this scene making a lick of sense. And while in the original, this was Hans' realization that Cleopatra was playing him all along, and a call to action to strike back at the seductress trying to kill him, here, Lon immediately forgives Lucy, and they bang some more. I'm more comfortable with this change since Lon has been set up as a dirty old man, and this is where a completely different iteration of a character is done right. But it also renders the freakout even more pointless, and at this point, the movie could star in its own sideshow attraction as the world's most perfect circle. There's another callback to the original Freaks later. There were some people attached to this movie, so I guess we should take a break and find out who wanted their name on the marquee. Lon is played by Christopher Adamson, whose character name is very likely a reference to legendary horror actor Lon Chaney Sr., who featured in many of Todd Browning's movies. Adamson has had a career spanning over 30 years and dozens of movies, including small roles in notable features. He's probably best known for Mean Machine Angel in the Sylvester Stallone Judge Dredd movie, and Davy Jones's crew member Jimmy Legs from 2 Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Plus, he was in that Lock, Stock, and 2 Smoking Barrels spin-off show nobody knows exists. And he later appears in another Asylum movie, which, seeing as how he's the standout performance of this movie, I'm greatly looking forward to seeing him again, as long as I don't have to see his bare ass again. Lucy is played by Rebecca Cochin, an actress we're quite familiar with by this point. And sadly, after 6 titles across only a year, this is her final appearance in an Asylum movie. Which, if all they had for her were roles where she was tortured and maimed, I don't blame her for wanting to leave. So long, Rebecca! You were too good for your movies, and you knew it. Sherry is played by Sharon Adre, an actress with only 2 titles to her name. And seeing as how her performance in this movie is...
Do you know where I spent the night last night? In a tent with the laborers. I will stay away from you. But don't you destroy everything that we built together.
Clearly just her reading off the script in front of her. I can't say I'm surprised. We also get longtime Asylum actor Dean N. Arevalo as one of the drifters, which also includes Jason DeParis from the previous Asylum movie, who has one more studio flick to get to. Amanda Ward makes another appearance playing Margaret the Cannibal Girl, and she's nowhere done with the studio yet. And Robert Pike Daniel is security chief, we've seen a couple times before, and will again later. John Karius has a background appearance as the Elephant Man, as well as a very impressive resume as an actor, grip, and makeup and effects artist for a multitude of low-budget horror and comedy features, mostly for Troma and Full Moon Productions, as well as another Asylum movie later. And while their scenes were left on the cutting room floor, we have independent child star Dalton O'Dell making his screen debut here, as well as former child actor, current rapper Dag Fersch, most well known for playing young Michael Myers in Rob Zombie's Halloween remake. Hey, he missed being cast in the knockoff of that movie, but the Asylum got him in the end, as they will everyone one day. And, like I said, they did get a handful of actual sideshow performers to appear in the movie, most of whom don't have that extensive a filmography because, well, they're live performers, not actors. But Mighty Mike Murga has been in quite a few things, mostly roles that required a short person or circus performer. Jeff Allen is a sometimes actor, sometimes stuntman, all-the-time car enthusiast, producing Car Warriors and hosting Car Chasers, as well as acting as car consultant on Better Call Saul, whatever that means. Larry Gomez is a real-life wolfman, and has appeared mostly in documentaries related to his condition. And retired professional clown Diego Barcanero, aka VK, appears as another wolfman, having previously featured mostly in things as, well, a clown. And with him, we have yet another name tied to the asylum who also played a part in L.A. Noire. Let's hear that ding-dong sound. And then we have a lot of other actors who went on to, well, a lot of stuff. Nothing I recognize, but 95% of it I guarantee is better than this movie. Go ahead, prove me wrong. Directing duties were handled by Drew Bell, a sometimes actor, sometimes director, whose most notable projects are probably voiceovers for various video games and shows, and who wrote, directed, produced, and acted in the show Zombies in Silver Lake and the movie Random Acts of Violence, which was distributed by the Asylum in their early days under the name Fastlane. And it's gotten fairly decent reviews, so I might have to check it out one day. This movie is also the first and only writing credit of Keith Leopard, who, if it's the same Keith Leopard, was director of content at Blockbuster, before later founding Uncorked Entertainment, a distributor for low-budget, low-attention movies like those found in your local Dollar Tree. It's his work at Blockbuster that's probably why he's listed in the special thanks section of several Asylum movie end credits. And if this movie is any indication of his writing talent, I'm glad he decided to instead dedicate his life to distributing titles like My Pet Dinosaur and The Boonie Bears. I've gone over most of the technical work already, so no need to recap anything there. But what I haven't mentioned is that this movie has simultaneously the best and worst audio editing I've ever heard in an Asylum production. A good number of Asylum movies we've seen so far have had obvious ADR work done at certain points, but in another experiment for the studio, most, if not all, of the dialogue for this movie was dubbed in later. I don't know if they were in a crowded area where there would be too much background noise for a live recording, or if there was a technical issue and they had to re-record everything, or if it was just an attempt to avoid the fluctuating and other problems they've had with audio recording in the past. But it's obvious that nearly every spoken word was recorded later in another location. And, give them credit, it mostly sounds pretty good. Everything's kept on one volume level, so there are no instances where I had to constantly increase or reduce the sound, and no sonic booms where one character suddenly starts talking at a louder volume. Plus no stereo balance issues, and no clear dub inserts that stand out from audio recorded on location. In terms of clarity and sound balance, this movie is a wonder to listen to. Of course, when an audio in a movie is that clear, then it just sounds more clear when they mess up. Having all the dialogue re-recorded and dubbed in later is fine when the audio mixing still makes it sound recorded on location, but when the ambiance is either too soft or missing entirely, it just sounds like someone's doing a Three Stooges short and the audio's coming from a speaker off screen.
I've been thinking a lot lately. I really like you.
I really like you too, honey.
Additionally, the mood of the actor when they're re-recording their lines can vary greatly from when they were originally speaking. As well as Rebecca Kochen can act, I never believed her words were coming out of her mouth. Her expression says, "Woohoo! Let's have some fun with this role!" But her dialogue sounds like, alright, let's get this over with. They want me on set for lesby friends in the morning. The very slight delay between her lips moving and her actually speaking doesn't help to sell the illusion.
I heard the two of them arguing about staying here and selling the castles and the land they have back home.
It's also obvious that they were either using multiple different microphones or they couldn't keep the settings consistent, as some scenes will sound tinnier and more muted than others, with clear microphone hum.
What are you saying?
I want to marry her and bring her into the family!
Oh, and you think the group is just gonna let that happen?
And wherever they re-recorded the dialogue was obviously not soundproof, as we'll still get background noise for some of the lines, which is prone to changing as they switch between actors.
So whoever you're with is gonna get it.
Exactly.
Not to mention the scenes with obvious audio clipping.
Please don't kill me! I have a family!
Oh, you cops think you're heroes?
Impressively, most of the sound effects were recorded live, meaning we get the natural sound of what's happening on screen and are spared the usual stock sound library. Which is good, because when they do have to include stock sound effects, they don't even bother syncing them up with the on-screen action. Add the extra lines that were clearly recorded to slip in where no one's lips were moving, and the times where someone's lips are moving but no sound is heard, and you get what happens when you throw The Surge, Legion of the Dead, and Birdemic in a blender. Then somehow convert that into WAV format and use it as a template for your movie's audio. It doesn't sound good is what I'm getting at. Also, most scenes are punctuated by a fade to black. Outside of ending a film or indicating a very long time has passed between scenes, the only reason to use this transition is if you want it obvious the writer had no idea how to end a scene. In other words, don't. Just don't. But if the plot, the pacing, or the total apathy to the source material still hasn't driven you off, well, we've reached the ending, and the point where I literally shouted, "Oh, fuck off." Lucy's drifter friends finally decide to do something in this movie and go steal food from the mess tent, but they're caught by one of the younger circus performers. Knowing Lon's harsh penalty for theft, they kidnap her and ensure her silence by killing her. Oh, sorry, did I say kill? I meant skin her alive and decapitate her! Yes, this is another movie where a young child is tortured and mutilated, and we get to watch it all in loving detail. And I sure as hell am not showing you any of this. I don't care what kind of movie you're making, this is never acceptable. If I was watching this willingly and somehow sat through the rest of the movie just to see how it ends, this is the point where I would have turned it off and snapped the disc in half. It's bad enough when it happens to an adult. I don't want to see dead kids. Much less kids being stabbed and scalped with a dull pocket knife. Even in the context of the movie, this makes no sense. If they're trying to kill her just to get her out of the way, why do it in a fashion that's obviously going to draw attention? Drown her, strangle her, push her off a cliff, do something that could be attributed to an accident or another local. You're just asking for an investigation to begin when someone finds her mutilated corpse. Oh, by the way, someone finds her mutilated corpse, lovingly placed on one of the Ferris wheel seats. Located in the center of the circus, so no, I don't know why nobody heard the intense screams of pain from a young girl being skinned alive. And that's not even the worst part. After a touching memorial service, Lon promises that those responsible will be treated the same way. And then the performers go out and brutally murder the group and the security chief helping them. Did we miss the scene where someone saw the act and told everyone what happened? I mean, we know they did it, but they don't. As far as we're shown, the performers just go after all the normies and kill them in cold blood, which is very disrespectful to the original message. Yes, they also go after the conspirators in the original, but Cleopatra and Hercules slipped up several times, making it obvious that they were trying to kill Hans. In fact, Hercules is caught attempting to murder 2 other performers and he barely escapes with his life. It was obvious who was trying to murder members of the troupe, and who the close-knit circus family needed to teach a lesson. And while they attacked and maimed the 2 in a fit of mob mentality, they didn't kill them. In fact, despite most of the footage being lost, it suggested that Cleopatra's most severe injuries resulted from a fallen tree and burns from a lightning storm. And Hans is later shown very shaken up by the incident, even though it happened to the woman who broke his heart and tried to murder him. The movie was very good in establishing that humanity was found on the inside, and that the disabled freaks had more of a conscience than people who society would consider normal. Here? Let's just give in to the sadistic psycho killer persona that sideshow performers are usually unfairly assigned, and have them massacre people who had nothing to do with the death of one of their own. And while I praised the movie earlier for its soundtrack of early song recordings, they really start to hurt the movie around this time. Normally, I love ironic uses of music in movies and shows, where otherwise calming or out-of-genre songs play over violent or otherwise depressing sequences. But that's all the movie's been playing throughout its runtime. If the movie used these songs sparingly, maybe just for the intro and the occasional transition, the horrific irony of playing them over the workers being massacred would have been a nice touch. Or even break out the instrumental soundtrack, emphasize how the songs represented normal life of the circus, but now things have taken a terrible turn and things need to change to reflect that. But because this is the movie's entire soundtrack, it takes what should be a terrible yet somewhat humorous couple of scenes and waters the impact down to the monotony of the rest of the movie. If you want to go the Osamu Tezuka's Metropolis route, go that route. Just remember to space your old-timey playlist out a bit with John Cage's 4 minutes 33 seconds. And of course, they go after Lucy as well. Lon and Lucy are about to get it on. Lon goes out to get a condom. The performers meet him outside. And apparently they brought a copy of the script for him to read because he goes right back inside and somehow knows she's been using him all this time. And this time, he believes it, despite Sherry already telling him multiple times. Due to Lon's refusal to act, Sherry takes control of the circus, saying that she's perfectly fine with Lon and Lucy marrying, and ominously adding that Lucy will be welcomed among the performers. Now, we know how this works in movies. Someone says they're going to make some adjustments to someone, then we cut to a much later time, where they reveal the deformed monstrosity the other person has become. Play the horror sting, freeze on a frame of the person's new form, and roll credits. This movie, however, decides to go the extra mile, as we get that, and the entire process. Yes, we not only get to see Lucy as a monster, we get to see every step of turning her into the monster. I mean, fantastic job on the makeup artist's part, showing her tongue getting cut off, her lips being sewn together, her eyelids ripped away, and a lot of other gory bits that would get me instantly demonetized if I showed even one of them. The detail on display is amazing to watch. In that while watching it, I want to run screaming from the room and barf in the closest receptacle I can find, but clearly a lot of work went into this sequence. And I don't care! First of all, it's yet another movie where I have to watch Rebecca Cochan tortured and maimed, and while she deserves it this time, I still don't want to see that. Secondly, these sequences aren't needed for a reason, because it ruins the shock when you see the final product later. Tusk wouldn't have had the same shock if we saw the guy actually turning Justin Long into a walrus. And third, the movie's over. It's too late to pile on yet more shock in your already tasteless film. I could see the sequence working at maybe the beginning of the second act. Heck, I could see this being the most interesting part of the movie if it was shown earlier. But by this point, I'm done. I don't want to see anymore. Especially after you showed me a young girl being mutilated. At this point, I want to do 3 things. Throw up, smash the DVD into 1,000 bits, and go find a corner and weep. Not necessarily in that order. So while they've done a wonderful job creating this very uncomfortable and gory scene, I can't enjoy them. Since, by this point, I have ripped out my eyes and bitten off my tongue. And if you give me a couple days, I can probably learn how to juggle them, so hey, put me in the sideshow stand next to Lucy. I'm sure we'll be the star attractions. And like I said, that's where the movie ends. Freeze frame on the horribly maimed Lucy, and cue the credits. Well, I guess it's better than the original beginning and ending, featuring an old fart telling this story to some shit-mouthed little shits who literally took a little shit on his porch. Yeah, huge loss we didn't get that. I know. What was the point of this movie? Seriously, who was this made for? What incredibly niche audience was this movie trying to get the attention of? It's not like the Asylum's other work that tries to copy that popular Blockbuster movie in order to trick the people at Blockbuster into renting their movie. This requires the viewer to know about the original Freaks movie, which, even given its cult status, I don't think comprises that many people, and want to watch what's basically a soft-core pornographic, even cheaper-looking modern retelling of that movie. My guess is, this movie wasn't made with public viewing in mind. It was made because the writer, director, and/or producer wanted to make the dream fetish project and still get paid for it. So they found a set they could use, found a movie that was just popular enough for people to recognize, yet obscure enough that could fly in with their under-the-radar remake without legal problems, threw together a script, cast, and crew, and churned out a movie before anyone realized they were just making someone's wank material. And that is the best case scenario for this garbage. Whether you see this movie as a remake or its own thing, it is a thoroughly unsalvageable mess. The plot is basically non-existent, the pacing is invisible, the sound work is inconsistent, and it's a big middle finger to the original source material. Sure, a couple of the actors and performers put their all into their roles, and it clearly has a wonderfully talented team of camera operators and makeup artists, but that just makes me angrier that such talent was wasted on something too schlock to be called schlock. I really do want to visit the world where Hank's story was the one they went with, since it does give off a similar vibe to the original film. Or at least when it felt more like a story than the final project. This is easily in the top 5 of the worst Asylum movies I've ever seen. I have not been this aggravated by a movie in quite a while. And considering the stuff I watch, that's scarier than any horror movie I've featured so far. Just stay away from this movie. Whatever format you find to watch it on, don't. Toss it, smash it, practice your knife throwing skills on it. Anything you do with it would be better than having to actually watch it. This movie deserves to be sent the way of the actual Freakshow. Just another thankfully forgotten blurb in the history of entertainment. I am so in need of a break from the asylum that I'm happy the next movie isn't from the asylum. Yeah, we're taking another detour from the asylum's main catalog and looking at a flick they didn't make, but they still claim. And I'm not even gonna set myself up by saying it couldn't be any worse than how I just watched. Oh, damn it! Just come back next time. Hey there, you've reached the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please take a second to like, comment, and, if you're so willing, subscribe. It's how my videos get noticed, and it encourages me to keep making them. And if you'd like to be even more incredible, check out my Patreon. It's a measly $1 to be credited at the end of my review videos, and if you'd like to contribute more, well, there are higher tiers and extra rewards. Whatever you decide, stay awesome, keep watching, and I'll see you next time.